There are truths that can only be heard when the world around you falls silent. Over the next 2 hours, let yourself drift into the stories of the music box forgotten on the shelf, the small chest kept in the closet, and the recipe notebook found in the attic. 3 quiet stories gently woven together. Welcome to Night Feather Sleep Stories. On the highest shelf of the small workshop, there sat a music box. It was covered in a fine gray layer of dust, a veil that time had patiently woven. No one remembered the last time its melody had sounded in that room, a space usually filled with the gentle sound of tools shaping wood. The box was silent, still. Its lid, with a delicate floral marquetry, was slightly askew, as if it had been closed in a hurry many years ago. The small brass clasp was oxidized, tarnished with the green of forgetting. Perhaps this is just one of those quiet stories, meant for relaxing. And sometimes that's all we really need. Afternoon light streamed through the workshop's only window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. The light touched the box's surface, but could not pierce its stillness. It remained there, an object of sleeping beauty, a promise of sound unfulfilled. Around it, other things lived their useful lives: jars of varnish, rolls of sandpaper, chisels lined up in neat order. Only the box seemed out of place, a memory stored on a shelf too high to be reached by chance. Today, that would change. The decision arrived without fanfare, like the morning light that simply is. It was time to bring the box back, time to hear its music once more. The object's silence felt like a small imbalance in the workshop's calm world. With a quiet sigh, a small wooden stool was fetched. Each step was deliberate. The stool was placed carefully beneath the shelf. Hands reached for the box, feeling the cool wood and the coarse texture of settled dust. It was heavier than it looked, a weight of solid wood and of memories held within. Coming down, the box was held in both hands like something precious. It was carried to the workbench, a wide, clear space in the center of the workshop. The window's light fell directly on it now, revealing the full extent of its neglect. The sides, carved with delicate vines, were dull. The wood, which must have once held a deep, warm luster, was now dry and lifeless. An attempt to open the lid confirmed what was already suspected. It was stuck fast. The wood had swollen with the damp of many seasons, sealing the mechanism and its tiny ballerina inside. The promise was clear in the mind of the one holding it. This was not a task of urgency, but of care. The promise was to restore, to clean, to mend what was broken, and finally to wind the small key on its base so the melody could flow once more. The workshop, with its scent of sawdust and linseed oil, would be the perfect place for this rebirth. It was a place where things were made to last, where patience was the most important tool of all. A plan began to form, simple and progressive. First, an external cleaning to remove the years of dust and grime. Then, a careful opening of the lid, without forcing, without breaking. Next, an assessment of the inner mechanism, the gears, the cylinder with its tiny pins, the metal comb that produced the notes. Each step would be taken calmly. There was no rush. The goal was not merely to fix the box, but to take part in its awakening. The sound of silence would be replaced, note by note, with the sound of a forgotten melody. The work would begin now with the simplest of materials, a soft cloth, a bowl of warm water, and the intention of returning a voice to an object that had waited in silence for too long. The first step was the cleaning, a job that required a delicate touch. Beside the music box, on the workbench, the necessary tools were laid out. A small white ceramic bowl was filled with warm water. Next to it, 2 cotton cloths, old and softened by use, one for dampening and one for drying. There was also a small brush with very fine natural bristles, the kind used for cleaning the details on sculptures. The task began with the dry cloth. It was passed gently over the lid and sides of the box. A fine cloud of dust rose and dissipated in the light. The first layer of neglect was removed, revealing a little more of the dark wood beneath. The cloth turned gray, and the surface of the box, though still dull, already seemed to breathe a little easier. The touch was smoother, less gritty. Next, the soft, bristled brush came into play. With light, precise movements, it was used to clear the carved vines on the sides and the contours of the flower on the lid. Dust had gathered in the grooves of the wood, hiding the depth of the craftsmanship. The brush swept away the tiny debris, revealing curves and lines that were invisible before. It was slow, almost meditative work. Each pass of the brush was a small act of discovery. The sound was nearly imperceptible, a whisper of bristles against the old wood. With the details cleaned, it was time for the water. The first cotton cloth was dipped into the bowl and wrung out completely until it was just damp, not dripping. Too much moisture could damage the wood. With the damp cloth, the cleaning began on the lid, gentle circular motions following the grain of the wood. The more stubborn dirt began to loosen, transferring to the cloth in dark smudges. The true color of the wood began to emerge. It was a deep shade of walnut, with darker grains that intertwined like rivers on an old map. The cloth was rinsed in the bowl several times, the water growing murky as the box surrendered its years of solitude. Each side was cleaned with the same care: the sides, the base, the back. The small brass winding key received special attention. The metal was dark, almost black in places, but the friction of the damp cloth began to reveal a muted golden gleam beneath the patina. After the entire surface had been cleaned with the damp cloth, the second, dry and soft cloth was used for drying. Every inch of the box was gently buffed. The wood, now clean and free of dust, absorbed the little remaining moisture and gained a subtle satin sheen. The touch was completely different now. The box no longer felt like a forgotten object, but like a well-tended piece of furniture. The smell had changed too. The scent of dust and must gave way to a clean, subtle aroma of damp wood, like a forest after the rain. The music box was left on the bench for a few minutes, allowing the air to finish drying any trace of moisture. It already looked transformed. The afternoon light hit its now smooth surface, highlighting the beauty of the marquetry on the lid. The flower, composed of different shades of wood, was now clearly visible. Its petals and leaves seemed almost three-dimensional. The external cleaning was complete. The box was ready for the next step, the journey to its interior. But for a moment, there was only contemplation of what had already been done. The outer beauty, once hidden, was now restored. With the exterior clean, the challenge now was the interior. The lid remained firmly stuck. Forcing it would be a mistake. The old wood could crack, the hinge could break. The solution required patience and the right tool. On the tool wall hung a very thin, flexible metal spatula used for precision work. It was thinner than a knife and had no cutting edge. It was perfect for the task. The spatula was held firmly. Its tip was carefully inserted into the tiny gap between the lid and the body of the box. The metal slid in with slight resistance. With the tip inside, a slow, continuous movement was made along the entire seam. The goal was not to pry, but to break the seal that time and moisture had created. There was an almost inaudible crackling, the sound of wood fibers letting go. The process was repeated on all four sides of the lid. Each movement was slow, feeling the wood's response. After tracing the entire perimeter, a new attempt was made to lift the lid with just the fingertips. This time, it gave way. With a soft, long creak, like a sigh, the lid opened. A peculiar scent emerged from within. It was an aroma of old dust, of metal, and of velvet that hadn't seen the light in decades. It was the scent of encapsulated time. The interior was lined with a dark blue velvet, now faded in places and marked by time. In the center of the compartment, lying on its side, was the tiny ballerina. Her metal base had come unglued from the rotating pin. She was of porcelain, with a pale pink dress and gold details. She was intact, just loose. Beside her, the brass mechanism took up most of the space. It was covered in a thin layer of dust and a few minuscule spiderwebs. The mechanism was a small marvel of engineering. A brass cylinder, studded with hundreds of tiny pins, was positioned next to a steel comb with tines of different lengths. It was the contact of the pins with the tines that created the music. A closer inspection revealed the problems. The cylinder did not turn freely. The gears seemed stiff, likely from old oil that had dried and hardened. The steel comb appeared to be in good condition, except for one of the smaller tines, which was slightly bent, leaning to the side. This small imperfection would surely create a dissonant or silent note. On the inside of the lid, there was a small oval mirror meant to reflect the ballerina as she spun. The mirror was tarnished and dull, its surface clouded like still water. The diagnosis was complete. The box needed more than a simple cleaning. The mechanism needed to be lubricated, the tine on the comb needed to be straightened, the ballerina needed to be fixed back in her place, and the mirror needed to be polished. The little ballerina was carefully lifted from the compartment and placed on a soft cloth on the bench. The inside of the box was cleaned with the same soft bristled brush used on the outside, removing the dust and spiderwebs from the mechanism and the velvet. Each piece was treated with respect, like the components of a sleeping life. The work would be methodical. First, the mechanics, the heart beating of the box, then the aesthetics, the visible soul of its small performance. The open box on the bench was an invitation to a deeper work, a restoration that went beyond the surface. The focus now was the heart of the music box, its mechanism. The most delicate task would come first. The bent tine on the steel comb had to be corrected. One wrong move could snap it, silencing that note forever. From the collection of small tools, a pair of fine-tipped tweezers and an even more delicate pair of needle-nose pliers were chosen, their tips coated in rubber to avoid marking the metal. The box was positioned so the window light perfectly illuminated the steel comb. With the tweezers, The bent tine was held firmly at its base for support. With the pliers, the tip of the tine was gripped with extreme gentleness. Pressure was applied gradually, a minimal and controlled movement, to bring it back into alignment with the others. There was a tiny, almost inaudible tink as the metal shifted. The tine was now straight, perfectly parallel to its neighbors. A single drop of sweat was wiped from a brow. The riskiest part was done. Next came the stiff gears. The old oil had turned to a gummy paste that impeded movement. Everything needed to be lubricated anew. In a small drawer of the workbench was a dark glass vial with an eyedropper. Inside was a thin, clear oil made for clockwork and other precision instruments. It was the perfect oil. A toothpick was used as an applicator. The tip of the toothpick was dipped in the oil, picking up just a minuscule drop. This drop was applied with precision to each pivot point of the gears. On the cylinder's axle, at the points where the cogwheels met, on the mainspring mechanism. Each drop was placed with the patience of a monk. The clear oil slowly seeped into the joints, dissolving the old hardened lubricant. After applying the oil, the mechanism needed to be worked to spread it. The winding key on the base of the box was turned. At first, it offered a lot of resistance. The movement was stiff, almost seized, but instead of forcing it, the pressure was kept steady and gentle. Little by little, the resistance began to lessen. The gears, now lubricated, began to move more freely. The sound of a dry scraping was replaced by a soft, healthy metallic hum. The key was turned a few times, not all the way, just enough to test the movement. Then, the small switch that released the mechanism was triggered. With a soft click, the brass cylinder began to rotate. The movement was slow and steady, as it should be. The tiny pins passed over the tines of the steel comb, and, for the first time in years, the box produced sound. It wasn't a melody yet, as the lid was open and the stop mechanism wasn't engaged, but a sequence of clear, crystalline notes rang in the workshop. Each note was crisp. The tine that had been straightened met its corresponding pin and produced a sound as pure as the others. The cylinder completed one cycle and stopped. Silence returned to the workshop, but it was a different silence, filled with the resonance of the notes that had just sounded. The heart of the music box was beating again. The mechanism was alive and well. The sound was proof that the work was on the right path. The most technical, unseen part of the restoration was complete. Now, attention could turn to the little dancer waiting patiently nearby.
With the sound restored, it was time to return grace to the movement. The little porcelain ballerina lay on the soft cloth, waiting. She was picked up carefully. She was a fragile, delicate object. A cotton swab was lightly dampened with water and used to clean her surface. Dust had settled in the folds of her painted dress and in her sculpted hair. The swab lifted the grime, and the colors became vibrant again. The pale pink of her dress, the golden threads that mimicked ribbons, the black of her tiny point shoes. Her minuscule face, with its closed eyes and serene smile, became clean and clear. The ballerina's base had a small hole, and the pin in the center of the mechanism had a corresponding tip. The problem was the old glue, which had dried out and crumbled away. The residue of the old adhesive was scraped away with the tip of a small blade from both the ballerina's base and the metal pin. Both surfaces needed to be perfectly clean for a new bond. On a shelf, there was a tube of two-part epoxy. It was a strong adhesive that dried clear and would ensure a lasting union. A tiny amount of the two components was squeezed onto a piece of cardboard. With a toothpick, The two resins were mixed until they formed a homogeneous, transparent paste. A minimal amount of this glue was applied to the ballerina's base around the hole. With a steady hand, the ballerina was positioned over the rotating pin. She slid into place with a perfect fit. She was pressed down gently for a few seconds and then adjusted to stand perfectly upright. Now she stood at the center of her little stage, ready to dance again. The glue would need some time to cure completely, so the box was left in peace. While the glue dried, attention turned to the oval mirror inside the lid. Its surface was foggy, with dark spots that age had brought. A clean cloth was sprayed with a solution of water and vinegar, a simple and effective glass cleaner. The mirror was polished with circular lotions. At first, the spots seemed to resist, but continuous friction began to lift them. The cloudy surface began to give way to a reflection. Little by little, the mirror regained its shine. The reflection became sharp. Now it showed a clear image of the workshop, the window, the workbench, the tools on the wall. When the lid was closed and opened again, it would reflect the little ballerina, duplicating her dance in a world of glass. Cleaning the mirror was a finishing touch that brought light into the box's dark interior. With the ballerina glued and the mirror clean, the interior was nearly complete. The dark blue velvet was brushed one more time with the soft bristled brush, aligning its fibers and removing any remaining dust particles. The compartment was now clean and tidy. The ballerina stood firm at her post, her pink dress a contrast against the deep blue velvet. The brass mechanism gleamed discreetly in the light. The mirror in the lid waited for its purpose. The internal restoration was finished. The box was whole again, inside and out. All that was left was one last touch of care before the grand moment. The final stage of the restoration was to polish, an act of nourishing the wood and protecting the work that had been done. In a low, round tin was a special beeswax blended with a little lavender oil. Opening the tin, a soft, calming scent filled the air, mingling with the workshop's woody aroma. The wax was the color of honey and had a firm, smooth texture. A piece of clean flannel was used to apply the wax. A small amount was taken from the tin and spread over the lid of the music box in circular motions. The wood, which was clean but a little dry, seemed to drink in the wax. The walnut color instantly became richer and deeper. The darker grains stood out, and the floral marqueterie gained a new dimension. The wax filled the wood's microscopic pores, creating a protective barrier and a soft, warm glow. The entire exterior of the box was treated with the same wax, the sides with their carved vines, the front, the back, and the base. Every inch of wood was nourished. The work was rhythmic and repetitive. The hand moved in circles, spreading the wax, feeling the surface grow smoother and smoother under the cloth. The scent of lavender and beeswax was comforting. It was the smell of care, of attention to detail. After the wax was applied to the whole box, it was left to rest for about 10 minutes so the wood could fully absorb the treatment. During this pause, a final detail was tended to: the metal parts. The brass clasp on the front and the small hinges on the back were still a bit dull. With a different cloth and a bit of metal polish, these pieces were rubbed. The golden shine of the brass emerged quickly, contrasting beautifully with the dark, freshly waxed wood. The small winding key received the same treatment and was left gleaming. After 10 minutes had passed, a new, clean, dry flannel cloth was used for the final buffing. With quick, light strokes, the entire waxed surface was polished. The excess wax was removed, and what remained was a deep, satin luster that wasn't glaring but reflected the light softly. The music box now looked new, but not in an artificial way. It wore its age with dignity, but was now visibly cared for, loved. The touch of the wood was incredibly smooth and warm. The work was complete. The box was lifted from the bench. Its weight felt the same, but its presence was different. It was no longer a forgotten object, but a piece of functional art ready to fulfill its purpose. The ballerina's glue was now completely dry and firm. The mechanism was lubricated and tuned. The wood was clean and protected. With a feeling of serene anticipation, the lid was closed. It fit perfectly with a soft, satisfying click. The brass clasp was fastened. The box was turned over, and the winding key was slowly turned. The spring offered a smooth, steady resistance. The sound of the mechanism charging was a regular, promising hum. The key was wound all the way, storing all the energy needed for the melody. The box was placed back upright in the center of the bench. It was ready. The moment to hear its voice in full had arrived. The workshop was silent. The late afternoon light streamed through the window, long and golden, falling upon the workbench. The dust that had danced in the air before seemed to have settled. In the center of the bench, the music box rested, its walnut finish glowing softly. The dark wood absorbed the warm light, seeming alive. The polished brass clasp shone like a small star. Everything was ready. The long journey of restoration was reaching its climax. Hands approached the box. With a light touch, the brass clasp was unfastened. There was a small pause, a moment of silence before the sound. Then the lid was lifted.
The instant the lid opened, the mechanism was released. The first notes sounded clear and perfect. They were as delicate as raindrops on a window pane, each one distinct and pure. The melody was simple, a lullaby or a slow waltz with a nostalgic sweetness. There was no hurry to the music. It unfolded with an elegant calm, filling the space that was once dominated by silence. The sound seemed to come from another time, yet it was present, vibrating in the workshop air. At the same time the music began, the little ballerina started to spin. Her movement was fluid and constant, a perfect circle on her small stage of blue velvet. She turned slowly, her pink and gold dress catching the afternoon light. Her reflection danced along in the newly polished mirror, creating the illusion of a partner. The tiny figure, once still and forgotten, was now the center of a universe of sound and motion. There was nothing left to do but watch and listen. The eyes followed the ballerina's dance, her graceful, endless turning. The ears focused on the melody, following the progression of the notes, the way they rose and fell in a harmonious sequence. The note from the mended tine sounded at the right moment, as clear and bright as the others, a small victory within the larger melody. The music continued to play, a full cycle of the song. It evoked a sense of peace, of order restored. The box wasn't just working, it was expressing its nature, doing what it was made to do. The sound filled every corner of the workshop, enveloping the silent tools, the stacked wood, the empty stool. It was as if the room itself were listening, appreciating the return of that long-lost voice. Time seemed to slow down. Each turn of the ballerina, each note from the steel comb was a moment of pure contemplation. The work of the hands, the patience, the care for every detail, it all culminated in this instant. The reward was not a prize, but the simple beauty of this performance. The music box, rescued from oblivion, was alive, and in the quiet of the workshop, its small, perfect song was all that mattered. The melody reached the end of its cycle. The final notes hung in the air for an instant, softer, before fading away completely. The brass cylinder stopped turning. The little ballerina completed her last rotation and stood still, her serene face turned forward. Silence returned to the workshop, but it was a different silence than before. It was a filled silence, resonant with the memory of the music that had just played. The lid of the box was closed with extreme care. The movement was slow, and the lid settled into place with a soft, final sound. The brass clasp was fastened, sealing the melody and the dancer inside once more. But this was not an imprisonment, it was a repose. The box was no longer forgotten. It was merely quiet, waiting for the next time. Hands lifted it from the bench. The polished wood felt warm to the touch, as if the movement and the music had generated a heat of their own. The box was carried back to the shelving, but not to the high, dusty shelf from before. It was placed on a shelf at eye level, in a place of honor between a few hardbook books and a small clay pot, a place where it could be seen and reached with ease. There, in its new home, it seemed to belong. Its presence was calm and certain. The light coming through the window was weaker now, heralding the start of evening. The music box reflected this gentle light on its dark, lustrous surface. It did not demand attention, but it received it naturally. It was a point of balance and beauty in the quiet order of the workshop. A final look was given to the box in its place. The work was finished. A small broken thing had been mended. A silence had been filled. There was nothing more to do. The workshop settled into the quiet of the coming night. The scent of beeswax and wood still lingered faintly in the air. The final image was a simple one, the music box, whole and at peace on its shelf, saving its song for a new day.
There was a small, dark wood chest at the back of the hallway closet. It wasn't often seen, hidden behind winter coats and empty shoeboxes that might one day be useful. The closet had a particular scent, a mixture of cedar and stored fabric. Whenever the door was opened, a breath of this still air would escape, and the chest would remain in its shadows, covered by a thin layer of dust that time had patiently laid down. No one remembered exactly how it had come to be there. It was just one of those things that exists in a house, a silent, forgotten presence. Perhaps this is just one of those quiet stories, made for relaxing. And sometimes that's all we need. The wood of the chest was a deep tone, almost black in the faint light, and its brass fittings were dull, tarnished by years of damp and neglect. The small shield-shaped lock had a greenish hue from oxidation. It wasn't broken, but it was dormant. Its surface didn't reflect the light, but absorbed it, as if it were tired. It was an object without purpose, an empty vessel holding only air and the memories of the dark. This stillness, this lack of function, was a small imbalance in the silence of the house, a silent invitation, one that had long been ignored. On a Tuesday afternoon, sunlight streamed through the hallway window, forming a golden band on the wooden floor. It was one of those quiet afternoons where the only sounds were the distant hum of a lawnmower and the soft tick-tock of the clock in the living room.
Upon opening the closet to look for an old umbrella, the light struck the chest in a different way. For the first time in a long while, it didn't seem like just a forgotten object, but something that was waiting. The dust on it seemed like a covering that could be lifted away. The tarnish on the brass didn't look permanent, but rather a film that hid an ancient gleam. A simple, clear decision formed, unhurried like settling dust. It was time to bring the chest out of that darkness. It was time to give it a little light and care. There was no grand plan or complex motivation. There was only the desire to see that dark wood shine again, to feel the soft click of a clean lock, to turn that dormant object into something present. The silent promise was this: to return life to a forgotten thing, to bring order and beauty to a small corner of the world. The task would be slow, methodical, and it was exactly what the afternoon needed. With the decision made, the atmosphere seemed to adjust. The hallway, once just a place of passage, became the starting point. The sun-warmed wooden floor would be the first stage. The air, once still, now seemed to carry a quiet expectation. The first step was to move the coats aside, one by one, and place them over a nearby chair. Then the shoeboxes were carefully stacked in the corner. The path to the chest was clear. With both hands, it was lifted. It was lighter than it looked, yet still solid, substantial. There was a low, hollow sound as it was lifted from its shelf. As it was brought into the light, the details became clearer. Small carvings of leaves on the sides, almost invisible under the dust. The corners were protected by brass pieces that curved gently over the wood. The dust formed a gray veil over everything, softening the edges and hiding the true color of the wood. The chest was placed carefully on the hallway rug, in the middle of the band of sunlight. There, it seemed strangely vulnerable, out of its hiding place. The work would begin soon. First, it would be necessary to prepare a proper place, a table where each step could be performed with calm and attention. The chest's journey from darkness into light had begun.
The chosen place for the work was the small wooden table that sat by the kitchen window. It was a quiet spot, bathed in the soft afternoon light, with a view of the back garden. To protect the table's surface, a thick, old cotton cloth, neutral in color, was spread over it. The fabric was soft and a little worn from use, perfect for cradling the chest without scratching it. The chest was then carried from the hallway to the kitchen and set down gently in the center of the cloth. The sound was muffled, a soft thud that marked the official start of the process. The first task was the simplest and perhaps the most transformative: the cleaning. For this, a few items were gathered. A white ceramic bowl was filled with warm water. Beside it, 2 soft, clean cloths, one for dampening and one for drying, and a brush with very soft bristles, the kind used for dusting delicate objects. Everything was arranged next to the chest, creating a small, orderly, and calm workstation. There was no hurry. Each tool had its place and its moment. The work began with the soft, bristled brush. With light, long strokes, the dry dust was swept from the lid of the chest. The dust rose in small clouds that danced briefly in the sunlight before dissipating. The brush passed over the flat surfaces, into the corners, and across the delicate carvings on the sides. The sound was almost imperceptible, a dry whisper of bristles against wood. With each pass, a bit of the wood's original color began to emerge, a deep, rich walnut tone, though still dull. The dust that collected on the protective cloth was a gray testament of the years of neglect. After all the loose dust was removed, it was time for the water.
One of the cloths was dipped into the bowl of warm water and then wrung out tightly until it was just damp, not dripping. The cloth was passed gently over the lid in slow circular motions. The moisture instantly revived the wood, darkening it and revealing the complexity of its grain. Lighter and darker lines appeared, like maps of dry rivers. The scent that rose was of old wood and damp dust, a nostalgic, earthy aroma. The damp cloth worked around the brass fittings, cleaning the wood around them, but not yet focusing on the metal itself. The focus was solely on the wood. The sides were cleaned, then the front and back. The chest was carefully tilted so its base could also be wiped clean. The more stubborn dirt accumulated in the cracks and corners gave way with a little more pressure. The cloth was rinsed in the bowl from time to time, and the once clear water grew murky, tinged with brown and gray. After cleaning with the damp cloth, the second cloth, completely dry and soft, was used to remove any excess moisture. The surface was polished gently, and the wood began to take on a very subtle sheen, a quiet satin finish. Now, free of dust and grime, the true state of the chest could be clearly assessed. There were a few fine scratches on the lid, marks of some old use. One of the brass corners was slightly dented. The right hinge seemed a little loose, and the inside had not yet been opened. The small key was not in the lock. For now, the focus remained on the exterior. The first layer of neglect had been removed. The chest no longer looked like a lost object, but one in the process of being rediscovered. The afternoon light hit it, and for the first time, it reflected it back. With the exterior of the chest now clean, attention turned to the small structural imperfections. They were discrete flaws, signs of time and use, that needed a careful touch to ensure the chest would be solid and functional again. The first issue to address was the right hinge. When the lid was lightly pressed, there was a little give, a tiny movement that shouldn't be there. The chest was rotated on the cloth, so its back faced the light. A small toolbox was brought out and placed on the floor beside the table. It was not a large box filled with complex equipment. It held only the essentials, a few screwdrivers of different sizes, a small hammer, pliers, and some jars of nails and screws. From within, a small flathead screwdriver was selected, its tip fitting perfectly into the brass screws of the hinges. The tool was cool and heavy in the hand. Very carefully, the tip of the screwdriver was set into the slot of one of the loose hinge's screws. The motion to tighten it was slow and deliberate. Not much force was needed. A quarter turn, then another. The screw sank deeper into the wood with an almost inaudible creak. The same was done for the other 3 screws on that hinge. After they were tightened, the lid was tested again. The give was gone. Now it was firm, perfectly aligned with the base. A small problem solved with a simple, precise action. The next step was to tend to the slightly deeper scratch on the left side. It wasn't large, but it broke the continuity of the wood grain. For this, a filler wax the same color as the walnut wood was used. A small piece of the wax was warmed between the fingers until it was soft and pliable. The texture was smooth, almost like clay. With a fingertip, the wax was applied over the scratch, pressing it gently into the groove. The excess was removed with a small plastic spatula, leaving the surface level. The wax filled the flaw discreetly. It wasn't an invisible repair, but it integrated into the history of the object, like a well-tended scar. While the wax dried and bonded with the wood, the focus moved to the slightly dented brass corner. It was a subtle imperfection, likely caused by an old fall.
Fixing it required extra care. A small block of wood was placed on the inside of the corner for support. On the outside, a folded cloth was positioned over the metal to protect it. With the small hammer, very light, precise taps were delivered onto the cloth. The sound was a muffled tap, tap. Each tap was followed by a pause to inspect the progress. Slowly, the dented metal began to return to its original shape, the gentle curve being restored. Patience was the main tool here. Brute force would only damage the brass and the surrounding wood. After a few minutes of gentle tapping, the corner was almost perfect, its original form recovered. The last task of this stage was one that required only time, the waiting. The chest was left in peace on the table for about an hour, so the wax in the scratch could harden completely. During this time, a cup of tea was made. Steam rose from the mug, and the scent of herbs filled the kitchen. Sitting at the table, a short distance away, it was possible to just watch the chest. It already looked different, more solid, more whole. The small repairs were not just cosmetic, they had returned the object's integrity. It was no longer fragile, it was becoming complete again, piece by piece, gesture by gesture. The structure was now secure. The next step would be to tend to the beauty of its surface. The chest's structure was now firm and its small defects corrected. It was time to focus on the surface of the wood, to return its depth and luster that time had hidden. This was a two-step process. First, a very gentle sanding to even out the surface, and then the application of an oil to nourish and protect the wood. For the sanding, a very fine grit sandpaper was chosen, almost like a thick paper. The goal was not to remove the old finish, but simply to smooth the surface and prepare it to receive the oil. A small piece of the sandpaper was cut and folded. By hand, the sandpaper was passed over the lid of the chest, always in the direction of the wood grain. The motion was long and continuous, from left to right, with light, steady pressure. The sound was a soft whisper, a rhythmic shh that filled the quiet of the kitchen.
A very fine, almost impalpable wood dust began to lift, settling on the surface like a light frost. The scent of dry wood became more present in the air. The work continued along the sides, the front and the back, with special attention to the areas around the carvings, where the sandpaper was guided with the fingertips. The texture of the wood began to change under the touch. Where there was once a slight roughness, the surface now became smooth as silk. It was a transformation felt more than seen. After the entire surface had been sanded, the dust was removed with a clean, dry cloth. The chest was wiped down meticulously, ensuring no residue from the sandpaper remained. The wood now had a pale, uniform appearance, like a blank canvas waiting for color. It was ready for the next stage. To nourish the wood, linseed oil was chosen. The glass bottle was opened, and a natural, earthy scent spread through the room. A small amount of the amber-colored oil was poured onto a clean, lint-free cotton cloth. The saturated cloth was then pressed against the wood in the center of the lid. The magic happened instantly. The moment the oil touched the surface, the wood drank it in eagerly. The pale color vanished, giving way to a deep, vibrant walnut tone. The wood grain, once subtle, now leapt into view, its dark and light lines creating a complex and beautiful pattern. With slow, circular motions, the oil was spread across the entire lid. The cotton glided smoothly, leaving a gleaming trail behind. The window light reflected on the oiled surface, highlighting every detail. The process was repeated on the sides, the front, and the back. Every inch of the wood received the same careful attention. The scent of the linseed oil mingled with that of the wood, creating a fragrance of an old workshop, of care and of time. When the entire exterior was covered with a thin, even coat of oil, the chest was left to rest. The wood needed time to absorb the nourishment it had been given. The initial, more intense shine began to soften, transforming into a warm, deep luster. The chest no longer looked old, but antique in the best sense of the word. It wore its marks of use not as flaws, but as part of its identity, now enhanced by the glow of well-cared-for wood. The work on the wood was complete. The soul of the object seemed to have been awakened. It had color, it had texture, it had life. The transformation was profound and visible. The wood of the chest now radiated a deep warmth, its grain dark and rich in the afternoon light. The contrast with the brass fittings, still dull and tarnished, was stark. The time had come to give attention to these metallic details, the shield-shaped lock on the front, the hinges on the back, and the corner protectors. This was the stage of polishing the metal, of bringing back the golden shine that was hidden beneath layers of oxidation. The materials for this task were laid out beside the chest: a small tube of metal polish, some cotton swabs for the trickiest areas, and a set of clean, soft microfiber cloths. The scent of the metal polish, when the tube was opened, was slightly chemical and metallic, a sharp aroma that contrasted with the earthy scent of the linseed oil. The work began with the lock on the front of the chest. A small amount of the polish, a cream-colored paste, was applied directly to the brass with the tip of a cotton swab. The paste was spread carefully, covering the entire surface of the metal shield and the small keyhole, avoiding the newly oiled wood. The cotton swab allowed for precise control, tracing the edges of the lock with exactness. After applying the polish, a microfiber cloth was used to rub the metal. The motion was firm but gentle, in small circles. Almost immediately, a dark tarnish began to appear on the cloth. It was the oxidation, the patina of time, being lifted away. As the cloth moved, the brass underneath began to change. The dull greenish tone gave way to a pale yellow gleam, which intensified with each pass until it became a warm, mirrored gold. The surface, once matte, now reflected the light, the window, and the face of the one leaning over it. The same process was repeated for each piece of metal. The corner protectors, one by one, received the paste and were polished. The heads of the small nails that secured them to the wood were also touched with the tip of a swab, becoming tiny points of golden light. The most delicate work was on the hinges. The chest was turned carefully, and the hinges were polished in the same manner, ensuring that every visible part of the metal was clean and bright. It was repetitive, yet hypnotic work. The transformation of each piece was a small reward. The contrast between the unpolished and the polished sections was remarkable, like the difference between night and day. The microfiber cloth, once pristine, was now covered in dark smudges, a record of the work performed. When all the external hardware was gleaming, a clean cloth was used to wipe away any residue of the polish. The surface of the brass was buffed one last time until it reached its maximum shine. Now the chest was in harmony. The deep, dark wood served as a frame for the gleaming golden brass. The details that had once gone unnoticed now stood out. The shape of the lock's shield, the curves of the corner protectors, everything seemed to have been redrawn by the light. The exterior of the chest was complete. It was an object of quiet beauty, solid, clean, and cared for. But there was still one mystery: its interior. The polished lock was still closed. The small key was not in it, and a quiet search began. Memory suggested looking in places where small things accumulate. The first stop was a drawer in the hallway dresser, the one that held loose keys, old coins, and other small forgotten treasures. Each key was tested in the lock, one by one. They were keys to old doors, to rusted padlocks, to diaries. None of them fit. The search continued, without frustration, only with a serene curiosity. A small sewing box was opened. Among spools of thread and mother-of-pearl buttons, nothing. Finally, inside an old ceramic pot on the living room bookshelf, between dried-up pens and paper clips, there it was, a tiny key made of the same brass as the chest, with a simple, elegant shape. It was so small it had almost been overlooked. With the key in hand, the return to the kitchen was made with a calm expectation. The key was inserted into the lock. It slid in smoothly. A turn to the right, and a metallic click, crisp and satisfying, echoed in the quiet. The latch was released. Carefully, the lid was lifted. The interior of the chest was revealed for the first time in years. A scent of old paper and dry wood emanated, a perfume of contained time. The interior was empty, save for the original lining of velvety paper, a shade of deep red wine, now faded and a little torn at the corners. It was a lining that once had been elegant, but now showed its age. It was decided that the interior also deserved special care. The old lining would be replaced with something new, clean, and soft.
The first step was to remove the old paper. With the fingers, it was pulled up gently. The paper came away in pieces, tearing easily. The old glue had dried and lost its strength. Underneath, the raw wood of the chest's interior was exposed. It was a lighter wood, pine, without the dark finish of the exterior. The inside was wiped with a dry cloth to remove the residue of paper and glue. For the new lining, a piece of wool felt in a deep moss green color was chosen. The texture was soft and dense, and the color would complement the dark wood and golden brass. The material was laid out on the table. With a tape measure, the dimensions of the bottom and sides of the chest were taken precisely. The measurements were jotted down on a piece of paper. Using the notes, the shapes were drawn with tailor's chalk on the back of the felt, a rectangle for the bottom and 4 rectangles for the sides. A heavy, sharp fabric shears was used to cut out the pieces. The sound of the blade slicing through the felt was low and satisfying. The pieces were cut with care, following the chalk lines perfectly. Applying the new lining began with the bottom. A special fabric glue with a mild scent was applied in a thin, even layer to the wood at the bottom of the chest. The corresponding piece of felt was then positioned carefully, pressing from the center out to the edges to avoid air bubbles. The felt settled in perfectly. Next, the sides were lined, one at a time, using the same method. The seams in the corners were made with precision, creating a continuous velvety interior. When the last piece was glued in place, the inside of the chest was transformed. The moss-green felt created a soft, dark nest, a welcoming and protective space. The lid was left open for a while, so the glue could dry completely. The chest was now complete, restored on the outside and renewed on the inside.
It was ready. No longer a forgotten object, but a beautiful and functional vessel, waiting to be given a new purpose, to hold things that mattered in the present. The afternoon sun began to dip, and the light in the kitchen grew more golden and soft. The chest rested on the table, its lid open, the scent of fabric glue already faded. The moss-green felt interior looked deep and inviting. The work of restoration was finished. Now came the most contemplative part, giving the chest a new place and a new purpose. It would not return to the back of the closet. Its place was now in sight, where its beauty could be appreciated. The chosen spot was a small wooden shelf in the living room, next to a few hardbook books and a small plant with green leaves. It was a place that caught the morning light. The chest was carried with both hands, its weight now familiar and comforting, and placed in its new home. It fit perfectly in the space, the dark wood contrasting with the light-colored wall. Now the question was what to keep inside it. It would not be filled with random objects, but with small, meaningful things that deserved a special place. The decision was not rushed. It was a slow walk through the house, a process of silent selection. First, a small wooden box was opened. Inside, there was a handful of old letters tied with a faded blue satin ribbon. They were family letters, written in an elegant script you no longer see. The ribbon was untied, and the letters were placed carefully on the green felt at the bottom of the chest. The paper was thin and yellowed, its creases permanent. Next to the letters, a small silver pocket watch that no longer worked was placed. Its hands were frozen at 3:10, but its smooth, cool surface was still pleasant to the touch. It was nestled into the felt, its silver gleam a counterpoint to the gold of the chest's hardware. Then, from a ceramic bowl on the coffee table, 3 smooth stones collected from a beach years ago were chosen. One was dark gray, another white with gray veins, and the third had a greenish hue, polished by countless waves. They were placed in the chest, their solid weight and smooth texture adding a natural element to the collection. The sound they made against the felt bottom was muted and pleasant. Finally, from a sewing box, an old wooden spool with a little red silk thread still wound around it was retrieved. It was a simple object, but beautiful in its functionality. It was the last to go in, completing the small collection. Each object was now in its place: the letters, the watch, the stones, and the spool. They were not treasures of great monetary value, but anchors of memory, small fragments of time and place. With everything arranged, the lid of the chest was lowered. The click of the lock this time sounded different. It wasn't a sound of closure and forgetting, but of protection and care. The small brass key was left in the lock. Sitting on the sofa, it was possible to contemplate the chest on its shelf. The late afternoon light struck its polished surface, drawing warm reflections from the wood and golden glints from the brass. It was no longer a silent object in the dark, but a serene and steady presence in the room. The process of restoration had transformed not only the object, but also the space around it. The chest, now filled with small memories, radiated a sense of order, of care, and of rediscovered history. It was a point of calm in the room, of finished work, a completed cycle. Night arrived slowly. The colors of the sky outside shifted from gold to a deep blue, and the streetlights began to turn on, casting a soft glow through the window. Inside the living room, a single floor lamp was lit, creating a circle of warm light that left the corners of the room in a comfortable gloom. The house was quiet. The sounds of the day had retreated, giving way to the low hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen and the distant murmur of night traffic. The chest on its shelf seemed to have merged with the tranquility of the room. The lamplight touched its side, highlighting the curve of a brass corner protector and the grain of the dark wood. It was not the focus of the room, but its presence was felt. It was like a low, constant note in a melody, a foundation of stability. A cup of chamomile tea was prepared, its steam rising in slow spirals in the cool night air. Sitting in the armchair, a short distance away, the gaze rested on the shelf. There was nothing left to be done, no piece to fix, no surface to polish. The work was finished. What remained was simply the presence of the result, the simple existence of the chest in its new context. The transformation had been gradual, built over hours of small gestures, cleaning, tightening, filling, sanding, oiling, polishing, lining. Each step had added a layer of care, removing the marks of neglect. Now the object held within it the story of its own restoration, the hands that touched it, the tools that shaped it, the light that revealed it. The small chest did not contain grand secrets or valuable treasures. It held letters, stones, a stopped watch. It guarded simple things. And yet it felt complete. Its function was this: to be a silent guardian of small things, a point of beauty and order. The night deepened. The clock in the living room chimed the hour, its sound resonating softly through the house. The steam from the tea was long since vanished. The chest remained motionless on its shelf, a dark, solid shape in the soft lamplight. It was at peace, and the room with it seemed a little calmer, a little more complete. The cycle was closed. What was forgotten was remembered. What was dormant awakened. And now it simply was. In the darkest corner of the attic sat a small wooden box, veiled in a fine layer of dust that time had patiently settled. No one came up here often. The air was still, holding the gentle scent of old paper and dry wood. A single beam of light slipped through a crack in the roof, illuminating motes of dust that danced slowly in the air, like tiny, silent stars. The house was quiet, and the only sound was the soft groan of the floorboards underfoot. The box was not large, nor was it ornate. It was simple, with worn corners and a metal latch that had lost its shine. It rested there, forgotten, a small disturbance in the silent order of things, stored away and no longer used. Maybe this is just another one of those quiet stories made to help you relax. And sometimes that's all we really need. Curiosity was a quiet, unhurried force. Hands drew near the box, wiping the dust from its lid with a slow gesture. The metal latch was a bit stiff. It took a little pressure, a careful motion so as not to break the old wood. With a low, dry click, it sprang open. The sound seemed loud in the stillness. Inside, there were no jewels or important letters. There was only a notebook, a hardcover notebook, bound in a faded blue cloth. The edges of its pages were yellowed with age. Lifting it, the notebook felt light, fragile. An elegant script graced the first page, a little shaky but perfectly legible. It read, simply, "Recipes from the Quiet Kitchen." Turning the pages was like walking through a time that no longer existed. The recipes were written in hand with a black ink pen that now looked gray. There were notes in the margins, small observations about the consistency of the dough or the heat of the oven. They were simple recipes: breads, soups, cookies, and cakes. None of them seemed complicated. They were made with common ingredients, things one could find in any pantry or garden. On one of the pages, a recipe stood out, perhaps for the simplicity of its name or the clarity of the handwriting: orange and rosemary cake. The description was short, speaking of the aroma that would fill the house as the cake baked, a promise of warmth and comfort. In that moment, a decision formed, clear and definite, like the beam of light that cut through the attic's gloom. The decision to bring one of those old recipes back to life, to transform those old words, written on yellowed paper, into something real, something that could be touched, smelled, and tasted. The decision to make the orange and rosemary cake. The promise was not merely to bake a cake, but to fill the house's silence with the soft sounds of a working kitchen, to replace the scent of dust with the aroma of orange and rosemary fresh from the oven. The promise of restoring a small piece of that quiet kitchen. With the notebook held securely, the journey back was made with care. Down the wooden steps, each groaning softly, across the silent upstairs hallway, and down the main staircase. Daylight streamed through the living room windows, stronger and warmer now. The kitchen was at the back of the house. It was a wide space, with light wood cabinets and a cool stone counter. It was clean and organized, but silent. There was a feeling of anticipation in that place. The notebook was placed gently on the counter, open to the chosen recipes page. The old words now seemed to belong in that space, as if they had finally come home. The disturbance from the attic, the forgotten box, had given rise to a new purpose. The kitchen was about to awaken. The first step was to prepare the space. The kitchen was already clean, but it needed to be transformed into a place of focused, serene work. The afternoon light filtered through the window above the sink, creating soft reflections on the white wall tiles. The first action was to open this window all the way. A cool breeze drifted in, carrying with it the distant sound of birds and the smell of damp earth from the garden. The still air of the house began to move, to breathe. The white linen curtain swayed gently, as if it were stretching. The notebook, with its fragile pages, was placed on a wooden bookstand, so it would stay open and visible without risk of being soiled. The words of the recipe seemed to watch as the preparations began. The old script was a silent guide. The stone counter, though already clean, was wiped down once more with a damp cloth. The motion was slow and methodical, from one end to the other, leaving behind a trail of moisture that soon began to evaporate. The surface became smooth and cool to the touch, ready to receive the ingredients and the tools. Next came the gathering of the utensils. Opening the drawers and cabinets was a deliberate process. The sound of sliding wood, the soft click of closing doors. First, a large white ceramic bowl. It was heavy and solid, with a feeling of permanence. It was placed in the center of the counter. Then the measuring cups and spoons, a metal set that tinkled softly as it was lifted from the drawer, a wire whisk with its smooth wooden handle, a silicone spatula. Each item was briefly inspected, wiped with a dry cloth if needed, and positioned beside the bowl. The recipe called for a round cake pan. There was one in the bottom cabinet, made of dark metal, seldom used. It was taken out and washed in the sink with warm water and a little soap. The water running over the metal made a soft, continuous sound. Hands felt the warmth of the water, the light lather of the soap. After being rinsed, the pan was dried with a soft dish towel until not a trace of moisture remained. To prepare it, a small piece of butter was smoothed across its entire interior, coating the bottom and sides with a thin, even layer. Then a spoonful of flour was sprinkled inside. The pan was tilted and turned, making the flour cling to the butter, creating a white protective film. The excess was tapped out with light thumps against the edge of the sink. The prepared pan was then set aside, waiting. The workspace was now complete. On one side, the open notebook on its stand. In the center, the large ceramic bowl. Around it, the measuring tools, the whisk, the spatula, and a little farther away, the prepared pan. Everything was in its place. The organization brought a sense of calm, a feeling that each following step was already accounted for. There was no rush. Time itself seemed to have expanded, and each second was filled only with what was necessary. The breeze continued to drift in through the window. The afternoon sun began to turn more golden, and the kitchen, once silent and asleep, now pulsed with a quiet, purposeful energy. The stage was set for the next act, the gathering of the ingredients. With the space and tools ready, the focus turned to the ingredients. The list in the notebook was simple, written in a neat column: flour, sugar, eggs, butter, baking powder, oranges, and a sprig of rosemary. Each item was an invitation to a small journey through the kitchen and the garden.
The first stop was the pantry, a small, cool, dark room next to the kitchen. The wooden door opened with a low creak. Inside, the air smelled of grains, spices, and the sweet scent of stored preserves. On wooden shelves, glass jars held the dry ingredients. The flour jar was the first to be taken down. It was large and heavy. Upon opening it, the fine white flour looked like freshly fallen snow. A measuring cup was used to scoop out the necessary amount, leveling the rim with the flat side of a knife. The flour was poured into a smaller, separate bowl. The sound was almost inaudible, a whisper. The sugar came next from a similar jar. Its crystals shone faintly in the dim light of the pantry. It was measured with the same care, the same quiet precision. The baking powder jar was small, and a teaspoon was used to retrieve the exact amount, a white and almost weightless powder. A pinch of salt was added from a small ceramic salt cellar. All the dry ingredients were gathered in this smaller bowl, a prelude to the mixture that would come later. Back in the main kitchen, the eggs were in a basket on the counter. They were a light brown with smooth shells that were slightly cool to the touch. 2 were selected and placed beside the main bowl. The butter was in the refrigerator, wrapped in wax paper. A block was cut to the right measure. The sound of the knife slicing through the cold butter was a dull, satisfying thud. The pale yellow block was placed in a small saucepan, ready to be melted.
The recipe, however, called for ingredients that were not in the pantry: 2 large oranges and a fresh sprig of rosemary. This required a short trip outside. The back door of the kitchen opened to a small garden. The air outside was cooler, and the afternoon sun, now lower in the sky, painted everything in a warm, golden light. There was a small orange tree in one corner of the garden. Its fruits were a vibrant orange, hanging heavy on the branches. 2 of the best oranges were chosen, twisted gently until the stem let go. They were heavy in the hand, with a lightly textured peel and a citrus scent that was released at a touch. Near the orange tree, a rosemary bush was growing. Its leaves were like small, dark green needles. A single sprig was cut. Immediately, the air filled with its strong, herbal, and refreshing scent. It was an aroma that seemed to clear the mind. Back in the kitchen, the garden's bounty was washed in cool water at the sink. The water droplets glistened on the orange peels. The rosemary sprig was dried with care. Now all the ingredients were assembled on the counter. On one side, the bowl with the mixture of flour, sugar, baking powder, and salt. In the center, the eggs, the saucepan with the butter, and finally the bright oranges and the dark green herb. The kitchen was full of potential, a productive silence that precedes creation. The notebook watched, its instructions ready to guide the next step. The transformation began with the dry ingredients. It was a process of union, of creating a uniform base from distinct elements. The smaller bowl, holding the flour, sugar, baking powder, and salt, was brought to the center of the workspace. The light from the window illuminated its contents, making the sugar crystals sparkle amidst the whiteness of the flour.
The first step was to sift. A fine mesh sieve was held over the large white ceramic bowl. The dry mixture was poured into the sieve. With light taps on the side of the sieve, the ingredients began to fall into the bowl below. It was a fine, silent rain. The flour fell like a veil, light and airy. This process served to mix everything evenly and, more importantly, to aerate the flour, promising a lighter, softer cake. Any small lumps that might have existed were broken up by the mesh, ensuring a smooth final texture. Watching the soft white mountain grow slowly at the bottom of the bowl was a meditative act. When all the mixture had passed through the sieve, the ceramic bowl held a perfectly smooth and unified base. It was no longer possible to distinguish the sugar from the flour or the salt. They were now a single thing. With the wire whisk, the mixture was stirred once more, with slow, circular motions. The sound of the metal lightly grazing the ceramic was the only noise. The movement was gentle, just to ensure that everything was perfectly combined. The notebook asked for nothing more for this step. It was a simple yet fundamental step. It was the foundation upon which everything else would be built. The bowl with the dry ingredients was set aside for a moment. Attention would now turn to the wet ingredients, which would bring life and moisture to this dry, dusty base. Before proceeding, there was a short pause, a moment to look at what had been done. The white bowl with its immaculate contents, the clean utensils beside it, the sunlight moving slowly across the kitchen floor. It was a rhythm of work that knew no hurry. Each stage was fully completed before the next began. This clear separation of tasks brought an order that was in itself relaxing. The preparation of the dry ingredients was finished. The base was ready. The kitchen waited in a calm silence for the next movement, the next sound, the next aroma that was to come. The scent was still neutral, just the smell of raw flour and the clean kitchen,
but the promise of the orange and rosemary aromas was drawing ever closer. The page of the notebook remained open, waiting patiently. The time had come to bring the mixture to life, to introduce color, aroma, and moisture. The preparation of the wet ingredients. The first step was to sift. A fine mesh sieve was held over the large white ceramic bowl. The dry mixture was poured into the sieve. With light taps on the side of the sieve, the ingredients began to fall into the bowl below. It was a fine, silent rain. The flour fell like a veil, light and airy. This process served to mix everything evenly and, more importantly, to aerate the flour, promising a lighter, softer cake. Any small lumps that might have existed were broken up by the mesh, ensuring a smooth final texture. Watching the soft white mountain grow slowly at the bottom of the bowl was a meditative act. When all the mixture had passed through the sieve, the ceramic bowl held a perfectly smooth and unified base. It was no longer possible to distinguish the sugar from the flour or the salt. They were now a single thing. With the wire whisk, the mixture was stirred once more, with slow, circular motions. The sound of the metal lightly grazing the ceramic was the only noise. The movement was gentle, just to ensure that everything was perfectly combined. The notebook asked for nothing more for this step. It was a simple yet fundamental step. It was the foundation upon which everything else would be built. The bowl with the dry ingredients was set aside for a moment. Attention would now turn to the wet ingredients, which would bring life and moisture to this dry, dusty base. Before proceeding, there was a short pause, a moment to look at what had been done. The white bowl with its immaculate contents, the clean utensils beside it, the sunlight moving slowly across the kitchen floor. It was a rhythm of work that knew no hurry. Each stage was fully completed before the next began. This clear separation of tasks brought an order that was in itself relaxing. The preparation of the dry ingredients was finished. The base was ready. The kitchen waited in a calm silence for the next movement, the next sound, the next aroma that was to come. The scent was still neutral, just the smell of raw flour and the clean kitchen, but the promise of the orange and rosemary aromas was drawing ever closer. The page of the notebook remained open, waiting patiently. The time had come to bring the mixture to life, to introduce color, aroma, and moisture. The preparation of the wet ingredients was a more sensory process, a dance of scents and textures that would begin to fill the kitchen. Attention turned to the two bright oranges resting on the counter. The first task was to zest the peel of one of the oranges. A small, fine-holed grater was used for this. Holding the orange firmly, the peel was run over the grater with light strokes. Immediately, a wonderful, intense citrus scent spread through the air. Tiny flecks of vivid orange peel accumulated, releasing their essential oils. The sound was a soft, steady scraping. Only the orange part of the peel was taken, avoiding the bitter white pith beneath. The zest was gathered in a small bowl, a vibrant mound of color and aroma. After the zest came the juice. The two oranges were cut in half. The color of their flesh was even more intense, a deep and succulent orange. A simple glass juicer was placed over a bowl. Half by half, the oranges were pressed and twisted against the reamer. The fresh juice ran down, filling the bottom of the container with a golden liquid. The sound was wet, a soft squish with each turn. The scent of fresh orange now completely dominated the kitchen. The juice was measured to the exact amount the recipe called for and set aside. While the orange aroma lingered in the air,
The small saucepan with the block of butter was placed on the stove over very low heat. The butter began to melt slowly, first at the edges, then in the center. It transformed from an opaque solid into a golden, translucent liquid. A faint sizzle could be heard as the last solid parts disappeared. The smell of the melted butter was warm, rich, and comforting. As soon as it was completely melted, the pan was removed from the heat to cool slightly. Now, the rosemary. The green sprig was placed on a cutting board. With a sharp knife, the small leaves were stripped from the stem and minced into tiny pieces. The motion of the knife on the board was a rhythmic, precise sound. With each cut, the herbal, resinous aroma of the rosemary intensified, mingling intriguingly with the citrus scent of the orange. It was a combination of smells that evoked sunshine and countryside. In a medium-sized bowl, the final combination of wet ingredients began. The 2 eggs were cracked on the rim of the bowl, one at a time. The sound of the shell breaking was crisp. The yellow yolks and clear whites fell into the bowl. With the wire whisk, the eggs were beaten lightly, just to break the yolks and mix them with the whites. Next, the measured orange juice was poured into the bowl, followed by the melted butter, which was no longer so hot. The orange zest and minced rosemary were added last. The mixture was gently whisked together. Its color was a pale yellow, flecked with the green of rosemary and the orange of the zest. The combined aroma was complex and delicious, sweet, citrusy, herbal, and rich all at the same time. This bowl now held the soul of the cake. It was the liquid heart that would join with the dry base, transforming everything into a cohesive batter ready for the heat of the oven. The preparation was nearly complete. 2 worlds, the dry and the wet, were about to meet. This was the moment of union, the point at which all the separate preparations would come together to form a whole. The large ceramic bowl with the sifted dry ingredients was brought back to the center of the counter. With a spoon, a small well, an indentation was made in the center of the mountain of flour. It was a gesture of invitation. The bowl with the aromatic liquid mixture was picked up. Slowly, the pale yellow liquid was poured into the center of the flour. It filled the well and began to slowly overflow to the edges. For an instant, there was a clear separation, the ring of white powder and the pool of golden liquid in the middle. It was an image of momentary balance before the final transformation. With the silicone spatula, the mixing began. The motion was not one of beating, but of folding. The spatula went down the side of the bowl, across the bottom, and up through the middle, bringing the flour from below up and folding it over the liquid. The process was repeated, turning the bowl slightly with each motion. Gradually, the flour began to be absorbed by the liquid. Streaks of wet batter started to form. The secret, as the notes in the notebook seemed to suggest, was not to overmix, just enough so that no traces of dry flour remained. The batter began to come together, becoming thick, smooth, and uniform. Its color was a soft cream, dotted with the green of the rosemary and the orange of the zest. While the batter rested for a minute, the oven was turned on. The knob turned with a soft click, and a small light illuminated. The background sound of the kitchen changed, now filled with a low, steady hum, the sound of the oven heating up. A gentle warmth began to emanate from it, gradually raising the temperature of the kitchen. The cake pan, already prepared with butter and flour, was brought near the bowl. With the spatula, the batter was transferred into the pan.
It fell in thick, slow ribbons, a soft and heavy sound. The spatula was used to scrape every last bit of batter from the bowl so that nothing was wasted. Then the surface of the batter in the pan was smoothed, spreading it evenly to the edges. Carefully, the pan was lifted and carried to the oven. The oven door was opened, releasing a wave of hot air. The pan was placed on the middle rack, positioned right in the center. The door was closed with a soft, final sound. The cake was now in its own hot, silent world where the final transformation would take place. The counter, once full of ingredients and utensils, was now nearly empty. Only a few dirty bowls and tools remained. The recipe book was still open on its stand, its guiding task nearly complete. The kitchen entered a new phase, the phase of waiting. The active work was over. Now it was a matter of trusting time and heat. The hum of the oven was a promise. The house was silent once more, but it was a different kind of silence. It was a silence full of anticipation. The waiting phase began. With the cake safe inside the oven, the rhythm of the kitchen slowed to a complete halt. The work now was one of observation and patience. The first task was to tidy the small mess that had been created. The bowls, measuring cups, and utensils were taken to the sink. Warm water began to run, filling the basin with suds. Washing the dishes was a calming process. The sound of the water, the feel of the soft sponge, the act of cleaning and rinsing each piece until it shone. The ceramic bowl, the butter pan, the glass juicer, one by one they were washed, dried with a dish towel, and put back in their proper places. The counter was wiped clean again, and the kitchen returned to its initial state of order. With everything in order, there was nothing left to do but wait. A chair was pulled up to the kitchen table, a spot from which one could see both the oven and the window to the garden. A cup of tea was prepared. The sound of the kettle boiling, the steam rising, the tea bag releasing its amber color into the hot water. It was a small ceremony of pause. Sitting at the table, the warm cup between both hands, time seemed to pass more slowly. The only sound was the hum of the oven and the soft ticking of a clock on the wall. Outside, the sun continued its descent, and the shadows in the garden grew long. The first 10 minutes of baking passed in silence. Nothing seemed to be happening. Then, gradually, it began, a subtle scent, almost imperceptible at first. It was the warm, sweet aroma of the batter beginning to bake. Soon after, the citrus note of the orange began to stand out, a bright and cheerful perfume that spread through the kitchen. It intertwined with the rich smell of the butter. And finally, the herbal note of the rosemary emerged, more subtle but unmistakable, adding a layer of complexity to the aroma. The fragrance grew in intensity, escaping the kitchen and slowly spreading through the rest of the house. The smell of dust and old paper from the attic was replaced by this aroma of warmth and life. Through the glass of the oven door, the transformation was visible. The pale batter began to rise, puffing up slowly. The edges began to turn golden first, and the golden color spread toward the center. The cake rose, its surface becoming domed. It was a silent spectacle of chemistry and heat. The timer, set according to the recipe, finally chimed, a gentle ring, not startling, but simply announcing that the time had come. With an oven mitt, the door was opened. A wave of intense heat and aroma billowed out, much stronger than before. The cake was beautiful, golden on top, with small cracks on the surface and visibly soft. A wooden skewer was inserted into the center. It came out clean. It was ready.
Very carefully, the hot pan was removed from the oven and placed on a metal rack on the counter to cool. The hum of the oven was switched off, and silence returned to the kitchen. But now it was a silence filled with the magnificent scent of the freshly baked cake. There, on the rack, the cake rested, steam rising from it in small, invisible waves. The journey from words on paper to concrete reality was complete. The result was something warm, real, and incredibly fragrant. Contemplating the finished work brought a deep sense of peace and satisfaction. The cake cooled slowly on the rack. The intense heat radiating from it subsided, becoming a gentle, inviting warmth. The kitchen was at peace. The sun was low now, and the light coming through the window was soft and orange, painting the walls in warm tones. The air was still, heavy with the sweet and herbal aroma of the cake. After some time, the pan was warm enough to be handled without mitts. A large, simple plate was placed over the pan, and with a quick, confident motion, the cake was inverted. It released from the pan with ease, landing softly on the plate with an almost inaudible thud. The bottom, now facing up, was perfectly golden and smooth. The cake was left just like that, simple, without frosting or decoration, exactly as the recipe seemed to suggest. A knife was taken from the drawer. Slicing the first piece, the knife sank through with a soft resistance. The texture was visibly light. The slice was lifted and placed on a small plate. The inside of the cake was a pale yellow, with the small green and orange flecks visible, like a delicate mosaic. A small cloud of steam still rose from the freshly cut slice. Sitting at the kitchen table again, the plate was placed in front of it. The recipe book was still on its stand, a silent witness to the entire process. A small fork was used to take the first bite. The cake was incredibly soft. The flavor was exactly what the scent had promised. The sweetness of the cake, the brightness of the orange, and at the end, the surprising and pleasant note of the rosemary. It was a simple flavor, but complete, a taste of care and of time. There was nothing left to do, just to sit, to savor the slice of cake, and to watch the daylight slowly fade outside. The kitchen, which was once just a functional, silent space, now felt like the heart of the home. It was filled with warmth, with aroma, and with the quiet satisfaction of a job well done. The old notebook had fulfilled its promise. One of its silent recipes had been awakened, and with it, a little of the soul of that quiet kitchen had been restored. The silence that settled was no longer of emptiness, but of contentment. The evening was coming, and the house was at peace.